Thank you so much. So welcome all of you. And, I wasn't planning on putting together slides, but based on a lot of the discussions I've had with many of you throughout the meeting, there really seemed to be an impetus for having some more information. So a little bit about myself, for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. I am a young adult survivor. I was diagnosed with follicular thyroid cancer at the age of 23 and been going through this journey for many years. I also am a cancer biologist by training. I actually did a master's in nutritional science and did a lot of work with sports teams and athletic training in sports medicine before I went on and got my PhD in cancer biology, and also have been an instructor for many years in the medical school, both at the University of Arkansas and now also at the University of Pennsylvania. So this beginning section slides that I was going to show is really just to talk a little bit about some of the background information. So I do want to say this disclosure that I'm not an MD. I'm not promoting or offering any medical advice, but I really wanted to share about my journey and give some background about what I teach medical students and about the journey and the importance of understanding everyone's own personal story and journey of weight loss, exercise, well-being, how this affects everyone and how different this is for each individual, especially those that are cancer survivors, and how really important it is to understand, for the medical students to understand this basic information, but then how important it is to listen to stories and find out where a person is at and meet them there. So going through, the reality is I think we all know it's all about balance. As we talk about exercise, as we talk about weight loss, and then as we just talk about general well-being, it really is about balance. And for me, I love this image because I have started doing meditation, and I'm a very visual person, and I also am extremely impatient and like instantaneous results at times. I need a product. And I actually have spent some time with the balancing and building rock sculptures and trying to get this. I'd actually built a rock sculpture in my own garden and found this to be very therapeutic for me, to give me something that I could look at and a tangible product at the end. But I think also it's great having this set up as a true balance, that you really need that yin yang. You need to have the balance on both sides. And that's where, trying to find that balance so that we feel like we're truly at equilibrium is really so important. So we're going to go through just some of the science behind this, because I think it's really critical to have some of this information. And this is actually taken from some of the medical school lectures that I give. But I think all of us are aware that the major energy sources for everything we do and all of our activities come from carbohydrates, and you'll hear people talk about it as glucose or glycogen in stores. Fat, which we talk about as triglycerides or fatty acids. And I think it's important to understand all of these terms are talking about the same thing: carbohydrate, fat, and then proteins, or what we call amino acids. And proteins, they can be used for energy, but they never should be used for energy. These are the Legos that build our body. The amino acids are those building blocks that make us who we are and give us structure. And we don't want to waste using them for energy. For most, this is never an issue, but I just bring it up so that you're aware. And then I think the hidden source that is a curse, and I know it is a curse for myself, is alcohol, that it doesn't provide really any nutritional value and anything that is critical, but it is a huge energy source. And I think we appreciate how many calories come with alcohol and what contributions that can make as we try to get into balance, especially when we're talking about weight and gaining weight at times. And I think it's really important to understand that at rest, the body's using primarily carbohydrates and fats for your energy. And it's burning these stores that we have in the body of carbohydrates and fat, where when we shift to mild to severe exercise, and this is talking when you're getting out of breath and when you're panting, you're using primarily carbohydrates for fuel. So carbohydrates can be used when you're out of breath. fat cannot be used when you're out of breath. You need oxygen, and you need to be being able to breathe and talk really easily to be able to use fat. And as I just mentioned, the protein really it can be used a little bit for energy, but it shouldn't. This is really the building blocks in the structure. So when we think about how we incorporate protein and protein consumption into our diets and thinking about balance, we shouldn't be thinking, we have to appreciate that it provides calories. And we have to account for that when we look at the balance and we want to think about weight loss, but we don't ever want to use that as our energy source. We really want to be able to conserve and use our protein for building strong, healthy bodies and our structures. So what do carbohydrates and protein contribute? So, this is just the basic. Every gram that you eat of carbohydrate, it gives you 4 calories of energy, protein 4 calories, fat is 9. So, consuming the exact same amount of fat versus carbohydrate gives you over 2 times as many calories. And this is something we have to think about as we go into balance and when we talk about weight loss or thinking about weight loss. And to me, and especially what I always talk to the medical students about, is this hidden source of calories. Hidden, sometimes the alcohol is, I dramatically underestimated, especially as a young survivor, being diagnosed in my 20s, how much alcohol was contributing to my caloric intake at times, and trying to find that balance. And right now I'm talking just energy balance, but we all know, and we can talk later about the issues of alcohol and just maintaining that, the balance, and especially mental balance at times. So this is really busy, but again, I just want to bring it up. This is what I teach the medical students, and we talk about our energy systems and the fuels that are available to us for energy. And the primary form is carbohydrate. And we talk about, and I put these terms up here so that you have them, because I think at times, especially since this is what I teach the medical students, they don't often talk about carbohydrates. They'll start talking about glucose and glycogen stores and forget to talk to the patient and meet the patient where they're at. So I want you to have this information in your toolkit when you're talking with those, and understand that I think sometimes is the disconnect, is we're using different languages. But the primary source is glucose. It's transported to your muscles and other tissues via the blood. We break it down into very small chemical pieces, and then it's transported all around the body. When we talk about ATP, again, this is talking about biochemistry and chemical reactions, but the reality is that this is just the energy. ATP is your energy source for all of your cells and everything that works in the body. So again, it's just making sure when we have these conversations that we're using the same language and making sure we're able to communicate with each other, because I think sometimes we get lost in the language, and that there is energy produced more quickly. So you can get energy much faster from a carbohydrate than you can from a fat. And what is interesting, and I think important to know, is carbohydrate stores can be depleted. So for those of you and myself for a little while who do training and are looking to do significant athletic activity, it's really important to understand your carbohydrate stores and depleting them. I know not all of us are running marathons. Actually, I will never run a marathon. Half marathons are my max at this point. But that this is something to know for those that are doing more significant energy expenditures. We're going to talk more about what you need every day. But at moderate to high activity, it's your carb stores can support about 2 to 2.5 hours of activity. So this is, your body has enough stored if you want to go at a little bit lower than all out for about 2 to 2.5 hours. And then this is different than what you have with your the fat stores. So fats are sometimes called triglycerides or fatty acids. These are stored again in your fat tissue, adipose tissue, and in your muscles. The muscles actually use the fat for fuel. So it's interesting because I think of muscles needing carbohydrates, but in fact, the muscles actually use our fatty acids for fuel. They produce this energy. You can produce energy from fat much more slowly than carbohydrates. And for us to be able to burn fat, you need oxygen. This is all a biochemistry and chemical reaction, but you cannot use fat or burn fat unless you actually have oxygen available. So if you're running at full speed and you're panting and you are having really out of breath, you're actually not burning fat. And we're going to come back to that a little bit when we think about how we want to lose weight or find that balance. And during rest, about half of our energy is actually coming from fat stores, but very little during intense exercise. And I think, this is something that I've really struggled with, even though I do this sometimes for a living, is we always think of more is better. And if you're exercising, push yourself harder, push yourself further. That's how you're going to lose the weight. That's how you're going to burn the fat. And it's actually counterintuitive because it's the slow and steady that actually burns the fat. And fat stores are theoretically not depletable. And I mean, this to me is just amazing that if you did not put, and this is all in a theoretical scheme, but if you didn't put anything into your body and you just walked for 3.5 straight days, you would have enough energy within your fat stores to just walk for 3.5 straight days without ever consuming anything more. And clearly most of us will never attempt that kind of activity. So it's really important to understand, and kind of as we talked about, we have different systems and different ways in which we can use the energy that we put into our body in the form of calories. This is how we use carbohydrates, how we use fat. It's all integrated and it has to be balanced. But what's really important to understand here is aerobic, which needs oxygen. That's what aerobic means. This is when you're doing exercise and you can still comfortably talk with someone. Walking, depending on how much exercise you do, how conditioned you are, this may be slow running, but if you can still have a conversation, you're in what we call aerobic and utilizing oxygen. And this is the primary system we use for endurance. And this is the fat burning system. So if you can carry on a conversation with what you're doing, then you are doing an activity that may have the ability or will be burning fat. This is in contrast to when we're doing activities that don't need oxygen, when we're running really fast and we can't carry on a conversation. Clearly we're still breathing, but we're shifting into what we call these anaerobic systems. And these are the systems that are used for speed events. This is what we use during weightlifting. This is the fight or flight when the bear is coming at you and you take off in the other direction to not get eaten. But this is using carbohydrates. So if we want to lose weight and we want to lose fat stores, we don't want to be exercising in that anaerobic state because those aren't the stores that we're going to be using. And again, for me, this is something I've really struggled with because that seemed to be counterintuitive. And, for me, it's always my personality, more is better. And it's not in the case with going through this. So immediate, again, that's what we just talked about. So all of these systems work together all of the time in concert. And it's really about what do we want? What is our goal as far as which system we want to make sure we're using? And like I said, if we really want to be focusing on weight loss and trying to burn fat, we really need to be working in this system where we're using oxygen and we can actually burn the fat. And this is just to kind of graphically show this. The red is your fat stores. And when you're utilizing fat, and you can think of this VO2 max, these are fancy exercise terms, but you can think of the amount of exertion. So 25% is kind of 25% effort, 65% effort, 85% effort, going all out. And what you can see is that within all of this, you're actually burning almost the exact same amount of fat at any time with any of these exercises. And actually the red bar starts to shrink when you're going all out. Yes, you are still burning calories, but you're not burning those fat calories. So if we want long-term weight loss and we want to, for me, I want to get rid of that extra belly fat, the best place for me to be doing it is down here. That's walking. That's doing, your activities where you're not panting. So this is okay. This is the range where you want to be. And I think it's really important to think about with weight loss, and especially burning extra fat stores and going through fat, that you get as much benefit down here, walking and doing other types of activities. You don't have to be over here pushing yourself to the absolute maximum, and total exhaustion. And I put this up because this is just one of the blunt realities of aging, is that our body weight and our composition changes as we get older. We don't need to go through all of this, but you can see our nice model here. And it just shows that your muscle mass decreases and your fat stores increase. This is just what happens with aging. And this is something that we have to deal with. And this is also further exacerbated in all of us without a thyroid. And this is just basic biology and something we can't change. And this is not our fault, but this is just the reality of what happens. So when we start to think about dieting and talking about weight loss, I go back to the whole idea. It is all about balance again, and it's about math. What goes in, what we put into our system in the form of calories and energy, we have to use, or it's going to be converted and it's going to be stored as fat. And for me, I know, and I think many of us sometimes, we underestimate what we consume. When I started really looking at this and trying to do daily tracking and try to understand, why am I gaining weight? Why I don't feel like I'm eating that much. I realized, a serving of bread is only one slice. Well, that's supposed to be slice, not slide. Sorry. Most of us don't make a sandwich with one slice of bread. It's two slices of bread, and you forget, and you don't even appreciate that now you have twice the number of calories of what you're eating. So it's really important to understand this. And this is kind of a little schematic that I stole from the internet, just talking about some of the foods that are sometimes consumed, and then what you need to do to burn that same number of calories. And it's difficult at times, and this is a harsh reality. It was for me, and became very difficult, and sometimes can get overwhelming. But I think it's important for us to really think about and appreciate sometimes what we consume, and what that means, and then what's going to be required to use that energy. Now, that doesn't mean by any means that we cannot consume these foods. It's about balance, and, starving yourself or always feeling guilty about what we eat, I think is extremely counterproductive. But for me, the way my brain works, it's better to have that information and to have, so that I can start to make educated decisions. It's a poor choice, in my opinion, to think about one can of soda means now I've got to go walk for 23 minutes. But I think just having conceptually understanding what we're putting in, and what it will take to make sure that we actually are utilizing those energy sources for the best thing we can. So for me personally, what I found is tracking can be great. Now, I hate food diaries. I hate trying to write down everything that I eat. I find it tedious and it's horrible. And I actually find also, if I'm trying to do that, then I automatically start eating less, and it doesn't represent what my normal daily activity is, because I find it a chore to write it down. So then I make the choice not to eat it. So maybe that in and of itself is a little bit of a strategy, to reduce consumption sometimes, but it doesn't always fit into what you're doing. I have 3 children at home, so writing what I eat all of the time is not practical, nor is trying to do Weight Watchers or some of these other things at times, because that means I have to cook my own meal and have my own set of consumption, and my family has to eat something else. So for me to find ways in which I can try to find this balance, within the context of having a family and feeding 4 other people in my house. So what I have found and what's worked for me, are some of the free apps that are out there on the internet. And we can talk about it. I'll call up my phone afterwards and I can tell you what I've used. But I can't do this long term. I do it for a couple days to give myself a glimpse of what I'm consuming, what I'm doing, and figure out, okay, where can I start to make adjustments, or where are my danger zones? Where are my witching hour? The one caveat of doing some of these apps is It's much more difficult if you cook for yourself. I'm very fortunate. My husband is a phenomenal cook, but I don't always know what he puts into food. So it takes some time. And I think actually with the app, it makes it great. You can create your own meals on some of these, and it talks about portion size and it allows you to adjust it. So if you put a cup of rice in the pot to cook, and then you realize you eat half of whatever you've cooked, it allows you to do that. But I think it's great to start to learn about what portion sizes really truly look like. Because I know for me personally, I drastically underestimated what a portion size really was. Start to track your activity. Oh, and I'll just add to this. So if you cook for yourself, sometimes it can be more difficult to use these apps. If you eat out a lot or eat a lot of processed foods, it can be really easy. Many of these apps actually even have barcodes, and you can scan the barcodes and it will upload everything into it. So it's a balance, but you can find ways. And I know for those of us in this realm, we talked about it in another session. It's great cooking for yourself, and the low iodine diet can actually be much easier if you cook for yourself, because you can remove all of the iodized salt from what you're cooking, and it becomes much more difficult when you eat processed foods. But many of these apps will allow you to do it either way. And I think it's important, if you have the ability, start tracking your activity. And your steps, and take baby steps. Just look at where you're at. Don't try to compete. This is something for me that I've struggled with. Is I'm extremely competitive by nature. I played sports in college before I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And I like to selectively forget that I'm a different person now than I was with a thyroid and competing as an athlete in college. But I do have to take that step back and recalibrate myself and realize that this is the new me. This is my new baseline. I have to establish it. And with the tracking, I've got a watch that I use. It allows me to compete with myself, and I purposely turn it off so I can't see what other people are doing. But that way I can see where I'm making my steps, and I can compete with myself so that I can advance, but I don't have to worry about what everyone else around me is doing. And I think that's important. And then talk with your PCP or nutritionist. I know I've talked with a bunch of you over the last couple of days, and we've struggled talking with an endocrinologist that doesn't seem to get this. But that's where we can use our entire medical team and bring other people in. It was actually with my PCP and actually a nurse practitioner in my endocrine office that I was able to start talking with nutritionists. This was a big step for me. I told you I have a master's in nutrition, so I didn't think I needed help. I didn't think I needed to talk to someone, but it actually was really enlightening, and they gave me some great perspective on places that I was over consuming that I didn't even realize it. One of the places was I love my non-fat chai tea from Starbucks, and the blessing and curse of where we've gone with processed food and with major food sources or restaurants and things is all the calories are published now. So now I realize what a significant increased calorie consumption I was getting with that addiction to my non-fat extra hot chai teas every day. So that's an area where I've reduced. But another thing that you can do is figure out what your basal metabolic rate is. And all of us have probably changed dramatically after our surgeries. And your basal metabolic rate is what your body needs just to survive. And I think too often we talk about a 2,000 calorie diet as what is kind of the norm and base it off of that. And that's what I was doing for a long time. Well, it turned out when I actually looked at what my basal metabolic rate was, I only needed 1,300 calories. So I was already consuming an extra 700 calories a day, not even knowing that that's beyond what my body really needed. So I think that this can be very enlightening. Many health centers have machines that can help you estimate this. A lot of places will do it for free now. But talking to your PCP or your nutritionist, they can help you a lot of times find this resource. And I think it can be very enlightening, because I think for me, like I said, I drastically overestimated what my body actually needed. And once I realized that I should be closer to this 1,300 calories without doing activities, but that's all my body really needed to sustain me, it became very enlightening of how I could start making balance in other parts of my life. And this is just a screen share. This is actually when I was actually much more active, but you can see that this, just kind of tracked the calories. So this talks about the calories that I burn. Down here, you can see my idle times, but that at this point, my resting calorie burn was about 1,500. And this was actually already overestimating. I told you that my resting burn, what my body needs on a daily basis just to survive, is actually closer to 1,300 hours, or excuse me, 1,300 calories. But when I started doing activities, this is where I could start getting the burn. So by doing my running, I was burning 1,000 calories, depending on what my activity was. Sometimes it was only 600 calories, but this gave me a much better idea of what my body needed, what extra activity I was doing, and then was I hitting that target? And it could give me a much better idea of why I was gaining or losing weight when I was struggling. So what I'm going to do is, I'm almost done. I don't want to keep, because I want to make sure that we can have, crap. Sorry. Trying to figure out how to get my pointer off, because I have a little, no, I don't want it to do this. See. Okay, we're back in automatic. I have a little vignette. So this is Battling Obesity, and it's just a little NPR vignette, and it's talking about a student who is trying to lose weight. So I'm just going to play it quick. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I think it's really enlightening about activity and what even small changes can make in our lives.
Pediatricians are on the front lines in the battle against childhood obesity. It's a challenge for them to get kids to eat healthy foods or spend more time outside playing. But NPR's Sam Sanders found one doctor in Washington, D.C., who has taken to prescribing the great outdoors.
Pediatrician Robert Czar says about 40% of his young patients are overweight or obese. One day last year, Czar wanted to find a way to get one of his young patients outside more to help with her weight.
She has to take a bus to the train, then a train to another bus, and then that bus to her school.
Dr. Czar wrote her a prescription for a modified bus route to school.
That one read, walk the remaining 4 blocks on the second bus on your route to school from home every day.
He told me about the 4 blocks, and I told him it was a 40-minute walk, and I was too lazy.
That's 13-year-old Kelsey Aguilar. She says at first she wasn't feeling the route change.
I was thinking, am I really doing this? I'm going to be late for school.
Were you late for school?
No, I was 10 minutes early.
Kelsey's kept up the walking, and Dr. Czar says she's moved from obese to just overweight, which is very good. This micro-targeting of physical activity, tweaking Kelsey's specific school route, is something Czar does a lot for his patients. And now Czar says he might prescribe 80% of his young patients.
Okay, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. So, I mean, I think that this is that aspect was something that really hit home for me, is I'm a rule follower. By definition, usually. I also seek permission and I want guidance. And I think that that's a really creative way for pediatricians that started working with their patients, really prescribing exercise. But what I think was also really profound about this is that it was just that one little step of Kelsey, walking an extra 4 blocks every day, that she was able to make that change from obese to overweight. So it doesn't take huge steps. This is as simple as deciding, you know what, I'm going to walk to the end of my street every day, and setting goals. Don't set huge goals. Don't set the goal that I want to run a 5K or I want to run a half marathon, or I think that's really daunting. Don't do that. Don't overwhelm ourselves. Give ourselves grace and start small, just like Kelsey. And you really can have these very significant impacts on it. And, that NPR piece actually goes on to talk about prescribing exercise in other areas, and talking about prescribing spending time in the parks within your city, or going and spending time and walking with the kids around the block, or walking the kids to the park instead of driving the kids, and doing it where you can. And obviously, one of the things that we discuss in medical school is we need to find access to these safe spaces. But these small changes, even like I said, taking the time to walk to the end of your block every day can start to have significant impacts. And don't be overwhelmed and competitive with everyone around us. That this is about you and your goals, and knowing that you can set those goals. I think everybody, we know our own body. Even if there are foods that you can't tolerate, we still need to have the balance of nutrients. So this is something that comes into play when, and for me, what was great about using these food trackers is not only does it talk about the calories, but it will give me all of the micronutrients, and it will spread it into food groups. Some of us remember the food pyramids and things like that. But again, it's all about balance. And we need to have a variety of different types of sources of energy. We need to have some fat in our diet. We need to have the protein in our diet to have the building blocks to make our body. We need to have the carbohydrates. For me, it was great having that because I could see it graphically with some of these apps. That worked for me. But one of the other things to think about then, especially those of us that need to avoid certain foods, don't completely, because you can't eat breads, doesn't mean you have to eliminate every carbohydrate source in your diet. There are ways to get that balance. And I think a great way to think about it is just vary the colors and textures you consume. When we're eating vegetables, make sure we're eating green vegetables and orange vegetables, and put some red fruit in there as well. That's how you can simplify and find that balance as well. Dieting is all about balance. I personally feel like going on diets and taking these following fads at times is more difficult, and the yo-yos that we can go when we lose lots of weight and then gain it back is so much more harmful than actually staying at a steady state, even if it is overweight. The challenges that we put our body through when we cycle is so much more harmful, especially for those of us without a thyroid, where we're so dependent upon exogenous, external, supplements of thyroid hormone because our body can't produce it anymore. And actually, it was really interesting. I found out, one of the big fads right now, or I shouldn't even say fad, but to me, because of the way we market it, I consider it a fad, is this idea of intermittent fasting. And it was actually my PCP that had recommended it. And I was so diabolically opposed and had that gut reaction, no, because I'm not getting involved in a fad, until I actually started reading about it. And to me, in my scientific brain, I hated the fact that we call this intermittent fasting, because it really isn't intermittent fasting. To me, when you say intermittent fasting, the way I heard that was you starve yourself for part of the time. And I'm like, that's not good for your body. However, intermittent fasting, when you look at it, is really talking about fasting or not consuming for a portion of time. And many of the conservative aspects of this are actually talking about don't eat after 7 o'clock and eat your breakfast at 7 in the morning. That's a 12-hour fast, but that's actually just a healthy way of eating. And I was actually an exchange student in Europe, and that's the way we ate all of the time. We ate our big meal during the day, and we didn't snack at night. So this whole idea of intermittent fasting to me wasn't actually about fasting and starving yourself. It was just about scheduling when you had the meals, and making sure that you weren't, snacking and having the cookies before going to bed. So some of these things actually are really, for those of us that don't want to hire or go with a fad for myself, I stayed so far away from it. But really, I think this is all about just developing healthier lifestyles. So some of this, don't necessarily think about the marketing scheme and what it's called, but how we achieve that balance. And this is, I think all of us in the room know it, but I always put this up because this is something that I talk to all of the medical school. And this is something that I actually present every single time I give a talk at any university talking about thyroid cancer, because too many people talk about thyroid cancer is, a cancer that's not usually lethal. Why do we care? Well, we care because the thyroid is your master physiologic regulator. And, we all know the thyroid is in your neck. It produces thyroid hormone, but these are all of the systems that thyroid hormone integrates with. Everything that your body does is dependent upon thyroid hormone in some way and crosstalks. And it really is very much thyroid hormone, the center of that balance, and helping all of these other systems focus or function the way they're supposed to. So this is why for us, it's often so much more difficult because our body can't self-regulate the amount of thyroid hormone any longer. We're dependent upon supplementing ourselves with a pill every day to make up for what the body can no longer do. So give yourself grace, because the reality is that this is a battle that we are going to fight for the rest of our lives, not having our thyroid, and how critically important thyroid hormone is to just normal function of the body, let alone when we try to exercise or do things above and beyond just being normal activities. So I think it's really important just to, further emphasize and steal this slide and take it to your PCP and your endo and remind them that this is why at times we don't feel great, and why it's important to think about all of these systems, because they all are dependent and crosstalk with the thyroid. So I just, at the very end, want to just say, for me, life's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's about the long haul and helping to find balance and make changes that are sustainable. For me, like I said, the food tracking, I can do it short term so that I can get a big picture, but food tracking and entering everything that I put into my body every day is just not a sustainable answer for me. So there are going to be solutions that work for some of us and some that don't. You got to find where it works for you. I think it's really important to be patient with ourselves, that this takes time. And with that last slide I showed you, thyroid hormone crosstalks with everything, that change is slow. And it's going to take time to find that perfect balance so that all of these systems can be back in balance again. And give yourself grace. I mean, this is the one thing that I didn't do often enough early in my journey, is to realize and appreciate just how much of my body was changing. And you can see every other system is affected by the fact that my thyroid was removed. So it's okay to have grace for that. And find a partner in this journey. I think it's really important to bring in your endo, your PCP, your nurse practitioner, your holistic medicine provider, whoever it is in, and I'll say it in quotations, the medical field. I think I'll talk about that as your professional partner within this journey, because they are going to have, this is what they do, even though they're not always an expert in thyroid, they do have at least access to a lot more information sometimes than we do on the outside. So I think it's really important to bring them in as a partner, with the understanding that you're still in charge and know your body best. And it should be a partnership. This should not be a dictatorship with they have sole control over this relationship. It needs to be a partnership. And I think it's really important to have partnership, and I'll call this at your local network, whether this is your partner in life, your children, your walking buddy, your family, friends, whoever. I think it's really important to have that local support network, and that person that isn't providing the medical and professional advice, but really helping to support you on that personal level through this journey. So with that, I think, living is a lot more than just being alive or dead. What is really excited is that roller coaster in between, and finding the balance to be able to enjoy it, and absolutely finding the ability within ourselves to enjoy the loops and the drops and the ups and the downs, because that's what makes life what it really truly is meant to be. So don't always think about just the beginning or the end, but learn to enjoy that ride in between. There's drops and good times, and then there's times where you're terrified out of your mind going through the loop, and that's okay. That's all part of the journey.